get started. Hopefully John's laptop will kick in a little bit, but I want to welcome everybody to the second budget workshop. Thanks for agreeing to be here for a longer period of time than usual. As usual, we'll have our finance chair describe the agenda for the night, and then we'll go around with the other administrators to, everybody will outline their budget items. But I thought first we could go around the table, introduce ourselves. I want to also say that Dr. Donna Wolfram is in the audience here. Thank you for coming. Also, Jamie Garvin from Town Council is in the audience. Thank you for being here. And Wynn Phillips, the Teachers Association President, is in the audience. So it might be helpful for everybody, even though you mostly know each other, to introduce yourselves on the table, starting with Catherine.
Okay, I'm Catherine Messmer. I'm the business manager here for the school district.
Harry Schwartz, Transportation and Facilities Director.
Jeff Thorak, Athletic Director.
Noel Hara, Technology Coordinator.
Martha Hughes, and new member of the school board.
I'm John Volz, I'm a school board member and the finance chair.
Susanna Zell-Hubbs, School Board Chair.
Howard Coulter, Superintendent.
Heather Altenberg, I'm the vice chair of the school board.
Kimberly Carr, I'm on the school board.
Kathy Stankard, I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning.
I'm Hope Straw, I'm on the school board.
Elizabeth Seifried, school board.
Jason Mangiarides, Principal of Pond Cove Elementary.
Troy Svin, the principal at the middle school.
And Jeff Shedd, high school principal.
Thank you. So, John, if you're comfortable starting the best you can, that would be great.
So, I'm going to go over a little bit of what we're going to cover tonight. Hopefully my laptop will start working at some point and you'll be able to see this on the screen. So some of you have it. I'm going to go over what is an overview of this evening. So tonight I want to cover a little bit of what we talked about as a background, our last budget workshop as a backdrop for what we're going to talk about tonight. I want to give an opportunity for questions, and then we're going to go through each department in detail and overall with the budget, starting with technology, the high school, athletics, the middle school, elementary school, special education, facilities and transportation, the administration, and then we'll go back and take a look at the budget overall. We're also going to spend a little bit of time also talking about, at the end, what's not in this budget, and then also give an opportunity for questions at the end of that. And then after those, we're going to go through and I'd like to recap some of the key points from tonight's budget discussion at a detail and at an overall level. So, with that, I wanted, before we got started, if there were questions from the audience, it'd be helpful to have them now. If they're germane to the discussion that we're presenting tonight, we'll try and answer them in the process of making those presentations. If not, we'll provide them to you subsequently to this. So we're not going to take direct answers now, but if you have questions that we can then incorporate into what we're talking about tonight, that'd be great. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience that want to make sure that we cover this evening? So I want to make sure everyone has a chance to do that if they want to. So when we get later on, say, I don't know, what was that? So, seeing no questions, we're going to proceed tonight, and I'm going to give a brief recap of what my goals are for this evening, and then talk a little bit about what we covered last budget workshop. So tonight, I think go through some of the key points from last time. I want to get a detailed review of every cost and department so you know how it's structured and where the money's going, and understand how we staff our schools, why we do it the way we do it, and the review of what's not in the budget, and then get back to a summary of what those key points are. So the key thing that we talked about last year.
John, I don't know if it's
Yep.
good to go
So-
or not, if you want to try it.
This is, well, what I'm going to do is take this basically to the first presenter, and then I'll have a chance to sit and get this up and running.
Okay.
So, this is a graph that was handed around last year that shows the last 5 years of our budget. And I've added the total budget at the top. But you can see the large bars here represent the percentage of our budget that is subject to collective bargaining agreement or long-term contracts. These are things that you decide how many people you may want to hire, but once you hire them, it's under these circumstances. So if your personnel isn't changing, this is what governs your costs. These are the the annual increases, this is the benefit amounts, this is the experience and other increases that are subject to it. And it's been historically over 80%, and more recently, as high as 83% of our budget last year. So when you're putting together a school budget, we talked about last time, there's a bunch of constraints that you have to meet. You're trying to do things for educational benefit, you're trying to meet certain regulations of things you must do, and certain things that you, what can be moved around, and this is to remember, these are the portion of our budget that is subject to long-term contract, and it's significant, it's easy to forget. So while we have control over headcount, we don't have a lot of control over some of those costs that are then associated with that, because they've already been negotiated, and a step away from those contracts would be a big deal. So that's the backdrop for what we're talking about tonight that I sort of covered previously. And now I'd like to turn it over to our first sort of department head, which is Noel, and he'll go through a bit of his overview and budget.
Thank you. Thank you, school board, for inviting me. First thing that talk about is our personnel. The personnel this year in technology, first of all, we serve both the town and the school department, the technology department. That means we serve the 3 schools, town hall, community service, all the way through the fire department, Fort Williams, and so on and so forth. So we're split because we're a one-town concept. So we have approximately 600 or 1,600 students that we serve, 271 full and part-time staff members at the school side, and 90 full-time and part-time employees at the town. So as you can see, we have a pretty good job ahead of us. It kind of makes the day go pretty fast. Current staff we have is myself, the technology coordinator, 2 network and computer support specialists, 1 computer user support specialist, and 1 database facilitator. Next year's budget, plan to keep the same FTE. We have a little bit of a turnover. Our database facilitator wants to retire, but I'm trying to get him so that he comes back a little bit. We have some report card and student information at the high school that he's been working on, and also have to understand that the transfer from learning the SIS school student information system, from learning databases, PHP code, and so on and so forth. There's a lot there, and it's very hard to find an employee or another employee in the state that doesn't have all those qualifications. And we're fortunate that this year had split time with a member of the superintendent's office, and she's been working very hard with the current database facilitator. She's almost there, but it would be very important for us to keep him as, quote, 2 days a week next year to make sure we get over the hump with the high school. So the FTE is going to stay the same. As far as the regular part of the budget, we are retiring 1 section of Milty iPads. So that's 2 years worth of, or 2 grade levels worth of iPads that we are no longer have to have a big bill to the state, which is around $54,000. And so the rest of my budget, I've stayed very, very the same, but I've used that $54,000 to do 2 things. One, we started looking into the infrastructure of the technology infrastructure of the classrooms at Pond Cove, and they are very far behind. For example, they really don't have whiteboards. They have chalkboards now, and screens for projectors and Apple TV. So part of that $54,000 is going into doing the first grade level, probably grade level 4, to cover that. The other part is that Milty is getting out of the network business. And so right now, the high school and the middle school have we have a contract with Milty to take care of all the access points and the backbone. And so next year, right now, they're not really, they're supporting, but they're not supporting. So for example, I can't, if I find a hole in one of the areas in either of the schools, I really can't add another access point because, you know, they don't do that part of the contract anymore. They do this quote support, but it's kind of limited. So the other part of that 54K is going to the high school. We're going to take out all the access points and put in our own access points. The four of us are going to try and do it over the summer, tripping over the custodians and everything like that. But to save the town money, we're going to try and do that. So those are the, you know, I'm very flat on my whole budget with respect, but we're going to continue to stay 1-to-1 from 3rd grade on to 12th grade. And that's what I have. Do I have any questions?
Just a quick reminder, your total overall budget last year and this year numbers, I'm looking at the page right now.
I think I am extremely flat, so I don't think, Catherine, do you?
With the way it's set up, I can't easily extrapolate that.
Yeah, because my costs
Spread through the schools.
are spread through the 3 schools. I start at 9,700, the accounting,
Yep.
and I go to 73, okay, which includes the middle school, Cove, and high school. But it's pretty much flat.
Reallocation between this school and that school based upon, I assume, the work you're doing in Pine Cove.
That's correct.
And some of the backbone upgrades, so.
That's correct.
It's flat for the year, where you're spending it in each school is moving around a little bit.
That's correct.
And in your view, how much of this still needs to be done in terms of upgrade to be, is this the right pace, is it slow, is it fast, how would you characterize that?
Well, we have some concerns. One concern is the aging devices and the teachers at the high school. We're going to go another year, which is, you know, stretching it out to 6 years on a laptop, which is pretty long for a laptop. So, you know, that's a concern. What I did with that is I increased my my repair budget a little bit to compensate that and took something away from another area. Another concern is the upgrading of the projectors and the wiring that goes through to the projectors. Like, we now have HDMI instead of the regular VGA cords, and that's what the projectors are getting now, plus with speakers, screens, and so on and so forth. So that's also a concern at the high school and the middle school and at Pond Cove. We addressed a little bit of Pond Cove. And one of the things about being part of the Milty grant, we get about $11,000 back, and I'm using that this year, and I'll be using that next year to offset some of the projectors and screens up at the high school. Another problem, or another concern we have is we have, not my predecessor, but the predecessor before that, Gary Illinois, before he left, which was 7 or 8 years ago, actually put in 2 large servers. Those servers are now 8 years old. We went to take a look at those servers, and when he bought them 8 years ago, they were $15,000 a piece. He bought one for the town, he bought one for the school system. So as I'm going through that, I thought that $15,000 and 8 years ago, well, they gotta be about 10 now, right? Well, they are now $64,000 a piece. So we are now, I had to switch gears. I'm looking at using Amazon Web Services to do some cloud computing instead of internal servers, to see if I can save some money that way.
Is that reflected in this budget, or is that going to be reflected in future budgets?
That is going to be reflected in a future budget, but, you know, that's one of the things that has not been addressed. Another thing that has not been addressed for a long time, because we serve both the town and we serve the school system, we're done at 4 o'clock, and the police department and fire department and the town keep going. We're also done on Friday, and the police department and the fire department and sometimes Public Works and the fort keep on going, okay? So there really is no support there. And that has been a known issue for the last 6 or 7 years.
Great, so there's no facility for any additional beyond our support to the town. It sounds like a town challenge. But we know also that there is some significant deferred costs on replacing what we're getting currently from servers and a strategy around that, whatever that may be.
That's correct.
That's not in this current budget, but it's something we're gonna need to address in the future.
That's correct.
Thank you. And so personnel's flat, expenses almost identically flat.
Almost
Great.
second flat.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I have some more paper,
Oh, great.
because I have a friend who's a tree farmer, so I have to announce. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. Jeff, Noel's paper's being passed around. So we're up and operating on the screen now, which is good. One housekeeping note as Jeff is handing out is, can I get someone to volunteer to, want to make sure that we keep time, and I'm got a bunch of things in front of me. So can I get someone to sort of give me a heads up when we're about a third of the way in? We've got from till 8:30 and another one at about, so.
What, how often do you want the reminders?
Probably a third of the way in and 2/3 of the way in.
Okay.
Because I think halfway is too late to adjust speed if we need to.
All set? Okay, so in terms of high school, I'm gonna not go through everything that's on this handout that I just gave to you, but I'll go through sort of the highlights of it. Starting off with some savings over the past 4 years, some general categories of savings. We have eliminated over the past 3 or 4 years, a third of our secretarial positions. So we used to have 6 secretaries for years and years and years, we now have 4. We have had partial eliminations of various teaching positions. So those partial reductions, and that really reflects numbers of students who have signed up to take particular classes, or changes in requirements, or something like that. So there have been partial reductions in teaching positions in English, math, science, computer technology, choral music, and reading over the past 3 to 5 years. In terms of non-staff savings areas, I just listed a few examples, one of which comes with a caveat. So the few examples are printing. We certainly have significantly reduced our printing budget as a percentage over the years, largely because there's more that is shared digitally and that sort of thing. So right now, I think it may be the case that about the only significant thing that we print each year, taking it to a printer, is the graduation program and diploma costs and that sort of thing. Postage has been whittled down significantly. We used to have every year quite a few whole school mailings to every family in the community, and now we typically have just one, which is the summer letter. There may be another one that I'm forgetting, but typically, for the most part, that's the one that we do. Field trips were cut back to almost 0 a few years ago. They creeped up a very tiny bit, but it really is a very tiny bit compared to where costs were in the past. And then, although it doesn't show up in the textbook line, textbooks is an area that we are always asking ourselves, is there a cheaper digital alternative, or are there free alternatives? So for example, our chemistry teachers don't have a hard copy textbook. There's actually a free open source chemistry textbook, which they really like, and they've been using it with their kids in honors chemistry. There are other departments and classes that use online textbooks. For example, some of our government classes use online textbooks. Most, in fact, a fair number of our social studies departments social studies classes use online text. So we're sort of always examining that, but with the eye that sometimes the pricing looks like it's cheaper, and sometimes it's cheaper in the short run and more expensive in the long run if you keep your books as long as we typically do before you replace them, which is about 8 to 10 years. And in the meantime, as we're looking to cut that down, the other thing that has happened over the past few years is to price of individual textbooks, particularly in science, but across the board have gone up a lot. The typical science high school textbook right now costs in the neighborhood of $100 to $120. That's a lot. Just a few years ago, they typically were 80 to 90. So that's a big difference. Our student population this year is 515. As of today, we're projected to be about 30 to 35 students higher, and that's simply because of a large 8th grade class who's coming to us. And that's factoring in a typical reduction of 5 to 8 students who choose to go off to a private school or a charter school or things like that. And that's been a fairly stable number, I think, fairly predictable number year to year. So next year, we are proposing, we have a significant population increase. I listed here our regular education staffing, and I apologize, I noticed the other two principals have included special education staffing. I can certainly get that and give you a supplemental report on that, but I sort of pulled this together quickly and wasn't quite sure, but it sounds like Jessica has that. So I've given you the breakdown of our regular education staffing in terms of how many teachers versus other things, and you can see that the vast majority of people are teachers, regular classroom teachers. We have 40.6 full-time equivalent classroom teachers. From last year to this year, that number has gone up by 1/4 FTE EdTech 3, which was essentially an expansion of one of our academic skills positions. And I think that's the only increase from last year to this year. Our graduation dropout college attendance data has been pretty consistent year to year. We graduate typically 98 to 100% of the students in a class, more typically 99%. Our dropout rate is typically between 0 and 2, usually closer to 0 than 2. But that's where it is. Our college attendance rate is about 90 to 94% each year. I think this past year it was 93%. The main average, based on Mitchell Institute data that I was able to find, is in the low 60s. In the past couple of years, it's been 62% college attendance. So what drives staffing decisions at the high school? So board members who have been around for a while and have enjoyed my scintillating budget presentations every year will remember my phrase, small, comprehensive, high-performing high school, which I think is what Cape Elizabeth High School is and that the community wants it to be. I've added another phrase, just to change it up a little bit, a small, comprehensive, high-performing college preparatory high school, which is really sort of represents what the aspirations are of our parents for most of their kids. Our class sizes, number of classes in any given area are largely driven by student class selections. We certainly take a look at school board guidelines. We're right within school board guidelines. We're just right in that midpoint of between 70 and 90 students per teacher, which is what the school board guidelines call for. I haven't checked for a couple years ago, but I'd be glad to check again if the board is interested to check with the schools that we typically compare ourselves with and see where our class size is compared to class sizes of comparable schools. 2 years ago, we were right in the same place, like within a tenth or a couple tenths, and I don't remember if we were higher or lower, but I can certainly get that data. We do exchange that data freely, so I'm happy to get that if that would be helpful for the board. But sometimes we get questions about why don't we have larger class sizes in the low 20s, for example, and isn't a class in the low 20s okay? And so the first point I want to make is we do have a lot of classes in the low to mid 20s. In fact, that would be more the norm than anything else. We do have some classes that are smaller because of safety reasons, equipment reasons, whether it's in art or technology or science or those sorts of things. And again, veteran board members will, this will ring a bell, resonate in terms of a point I've tried to make, but I'm not sure how effectively I've made it over the years. So I'm trying it a different way, that there is a tendency in a small, comprehensive, high-performing college preparatory high school to always end up a little bit lower than the low 20s. And so the best way that I can illustrate that is I've I've included a couple of examples. If in a school of our size, and this is just typical of the decisions we have to make, let us say, for example, that we have 57 students sign up to take French 3. So our choices are, we can offer 2 sections or 2 classes of French 3, which results in an average class size of 29 students, which would be really large for us. We've had it before, not too distant past, but it would be really large. Or we can offer 3 sections for an average of 19 students per class. So just one more section reduces our class size average by 10 students. If you took a school that was twice our size and had a comparable proportionate sort of sign-up of students, you'd have 114 students for French 3, and the choices would be you could have 4 sections of 29 average, you could have 5 sections of 23 average, and that's the choice that we don't have, or we could have 6 sections of 19. If I had that choice in many high schools, I would say 5 sections is a nice sweet spot. It's a manageable number. It's a manageable number for teachers. It's a workable number for students. But it's not a choice that a lot of times a small, comprehensive, high-performing school has. And that repeats itself in subject after subject after subject after subject. And I've given you here a little bit of explanation about why, given the choice, I would do 19 students as opposed to 29 students unless it was impossible to avoid that. Sometimes it is impossible to avoid. So what is it about being a high-performing and college preparatory high school that is inconsistent with a large class size? Why do we have a preference for 19 versus 29 when that's our choice? And I probably have not coined this phrase, but I invented it while I was here, and I haven't tried this one on before in budget meetings. So it's the iceberg effect of teaching. That I think a lot of people who are never taught before they understand it in the abstract, but I don't think they understand it truly. I think that 60 to 80% of the job of teachers is spent outside the classroom. For different areas, some areas it would be 90%. Some areas it might be 50, but it's going to be in that range typically of 60 to 80%. And by far the biggest chunk of that outside of class time, that part of the iceberg that people don't see, is correcting time for teachers. Correcting tests that include long essays, correcting essays themselves, correcting videos that students are presenting, listening to students in foreign language, what they've done for an assignment, and that sort of thing. And the larger the class size, the major issue with larger class sizes, for me, it's not so much classroom management. In Cape Elizabeth High School, we have very few disciplinary issues. The vast majority of our teachers could handle and do sometimes have to handle 25, 27, 28, 29 students. It's not a classroom management issue, it's a rigor issue. Because as a matter of sanity, a teacher cannot, if you have 29 students versus 19, you are not going to give the same assessments. You're going to give assessments that are multiple choice, quick correction, because there's only so much time in the day, and teachers have families as well. So if we have the smaller size, then teachers can give more challenging, rigorous, creative assessments because they can handle the correcting load that comes along with that. And that's that piece of the iceberg that I think explains why you want to have smaller class sizes. I thought I would, and I'm rattling through this, and it's not, okay. I'm happy to get questions, but I sense that you wanted me to sort of go through and then ask. Okay. All right, so I did want to highlight, as I was thinking about it, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, programs we have created at Cape Elizabeth High School with 0 increase in the budget and 0 increase in staff. Our advisory program. Today, we started our day that yesterday, as you know, was a non-school day. Today was a difficult day. We started the day with an advisory meeting so students could have an opportunity to debrief what happened yesterday. It was invaluable, and the relationships that teachers have been able to develop with kids fosters meaningful discussions. So our advisory program, there's no expense to that. Our freshman academy, no expense to that. Our student-driven learning program, no expense, because we're using resources in a different way. I can be more specific about it if you're curious, but we've added 1 concurrent enrollment class that we've offered the last 2 years. Next year, we're adding another concurrent enrollment class. no cost to that, no change in staffing. We have, in the last 2 years, restored the level of staffing in the Achievement Center. And the Achievement Center this year is thriving. It's actually, sometimes I walk by it and I worry that there are too many kids in it, but it's thriving. Last year, we were concerned about lower numbers. It has come back big time this year. We have a teacher-level technology integrator. We used to have an Ed Tech 3 technology integrator, and the level of services, it's different. We've added computer programming without increasing staff. Next year, our student increase is between 30 and 40 students. We have not asked for a staffing increase. We're going to absorb that. I think we can absorb that as best we can. We may have to do some fiddling around the edges with some of our programs, but I think we can do it. We've significantly expanded the middle school and high school robotics program and begun to offer actual courses in robotics, again, without any increase in staff. So I think we're always trying to look for how can we use our resources most effectively to get the greatest bang for the buck and do some creative and innovative and different things. So I am not an expert on the state essential program and services funding formula. So I'm happy to do a more detailed analysis of this. I dug into it just a little bit this afternoon to get a sense of why there is a gap, and there is a gap. Why is our staffing higher than the EPS formula suggests? And EPS has formulas that say, based on so many kids, the state will support a percentage of so many staff members in different categories. So I took a look at the EPS formula and looked at our staffing and asked myself what would happen if we stuck to just EPS formula. And I've described it, EPS formula, and I hope this is not intended to be pejorative, but EPS formula is not reflecting what excellent schools do. EPS formula is reflecting what average, or I've used the term mediocre schools do. Now excellent schools, there can be excellent schools that use their resources really well and are at or below the EPS formula. But you won't find any excellent schools at that level, I would virtually guarantee. So if we were to apply just strictly, and again, this is fairly quick analysis, and I know I'm on TV and I can't take it back, but I reserve the right to do a more detailed analysis and fiddle around the edges. But as I looked at it quickly and did some calculations, I think if we applied strictly EPS, we would have to lay off 20% of our teachers. If you have questions later, I'd be glad to tell you what, in my mind, we would do if we were to lay off 20% of our teachers. We would lose one of our 3 guidance counselors. We would lose our only regular education social worker. And we would have partial reductions in administrative, library, and nursing staff. Not complete, but partial. Then I put in a little section here about our non-staffing costs at the high school compared to the other schools, and by the other schools I mean Pond Cove and middle school, because there are differences. Our textbooks costs tend to be higher, without any question. And I think in part that reflects that our textbooks do not drive our curriculum. They are not our curriculum, but teachers tend to use them more commonly in the high school level than I think they do necessarily in Pond Cove and middle school. And it's not that we replace textbooks willy-nilly. Our typical textbook is 8 to 10 years old. I know I have a textbook, a proposal to buy, I'm pretty sure it's earth science textbooks in the budget for this year, and it's environmental science textbooks, I'm sorry. It's environmental texts, and it will be to replace 16-year-old environmental science textbooks. That's what the teachers have been using recently, and they obviously supplement those textbooks as well, but that's the age. We don't have an automatic every 5-year replacement cycle. It would be sweet, but it would be almost a luxury to do that. But we get our money's worth out of our textbooks. Supplies, our art program, our science program, our computer program, and our industrial technology program really, in terms of the scheduling, the length of time the classes meet, and that sort of stuff, are really intensive supply users. And they really drive a significantly higher supply line than you would find typically in an elementary school or middle school. almost our entire extracurricular program. And athletic program is one that, I mean, there are bits and pieces of it, but it's completely different thing when you get to the high school in terms of extracurricular offerings. And that's really part of being a comprehensive school, is wanting to engage kids through what they're interested in. And then I put down paths tuition as well. Obviously doesn't have a place of
Jeff, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Do you include athletics with extracurricular?
Yes, I
You
would,
do,
yeah.
okay.
So, I would say that. Again, there is a middle school athletics budget, and it is supported, but high school one is probably 50% larger. Our extracurricular budget is probably 70 to 80% larger, a non-athletic extracurricular budget. So next year's safety and educational priorities that are in the budget. And these are my priorities right now. Continued implementation and improvement of our proficiency-based education system. I think that really comes in at a zero cost. There's professional development that will be sent that way as it was last year, but there's not a proposal to increase cost connected to that. Addition of a second dual enrollment class, which would be in English. And dual enrollment is a student takes a course in high school and gets high school credit and college credit for it at the same time. They are duly enrolled in both the high school course and college, so they're getting those credits. Possible application next year for participation in the International Baccalaureate Program. The expenses of that next year would be $4,000. Targeted appropriate classes in math to better meet all students' needs. And that would be at zero cost to the budget using current staffing, but just being more mindful of where students are and what we need to do. As the board may know, we created midway through this year a class that didn't exist when we started the year, and we decided we were missing something for kids, and we created it. The addition of the first cross-disciplinary class at Cape Elizabeth High School, and I hope this is the first of more to come. And I hope students sign up to take it. And it's a combination of environmental science and economics. So it's going to allow kids to really look at policy issues in environmental science, which I think is going to be really exciting. And then the other issue, and I don't know if this is educational or safety, I think it's both, is the only really different equipment need that I've put in the budget this year really is safer risers for choral music. If I get not one other dollar of expense additional out of the budget this year, I need to get new choral risers. They are pathetic, sad, unsafe set of choral risers that we've had since the school opened in 1969. They're not up to date. And then I just put in, I wasn't sure if we were supposed to do that here or elsewhere, so I just put it in, are there unmet educational and safety needs in the current budget proposal compared to what our initial conversations reflected? And one I put in, it's timely, I think, as a school resource officer. I really do think it's time to think about not looking at a school resource officer as something that needs to be done through a grant, but a school resource officer is something that we should look at, consider at least through the regular school and town budget. Sufficient staffing to offer both French 1 and Spanish 1. This year we are offering neither. Next year with current staffing, I suspect we will offer neither either, unless we have a partial increase in world language staffing. Restoration of regular education reading support, which was eliminated several years ago, and a part-time computer programming teacher. Right now, our technology integrator teaches, technology integrator and librarian together have created some opportunities for students to take computer programming, but it does take away from their other responsibilities. And it's a growing program, and I'd like to have it continue to be a growing program, and there's not anything in the budget about that. So that's what I got. Thank you.
I have a question,
Yes.
Jeff. Who would take the French 1 and Spanish 1? Someone who's never taken the language? Is that
So
the premise?
two different types of people. Number one is students who transfer to the school. Because in many schools, high school is still the starting point for students taking foreign language. So that's one category of student. Students who are interested in doubling up in foreign language is another another category, and we have, it's not a large number of kids, but it's a countable number of kids, a significant number of kids. And number 3 is students who, for whatever reason, decide to change the language that they're in. Maybe because they're struggling with a particular language, but they know they have to take at least 2 years consecutively of a same language in high school to be competitive for college, so those are the categories.
So right now, the kids who enter high school, and it alternates every year, who enter high school having studied Spanish, are basically forced to stick with Spanish unless,
Well, they make that decision going into 7th grade is when they, so, for example, if they started off with French, when they get to 7th grade, they get to choose whether to continue with French
Oh, good.
or
Okay.
switch over to Spanish at that point. But what Jeff is saying is if they start with French
No,
and they
okay.
decide to stay with it, and then they decide to stay with it in 8th grade, and at that point it gets too hard, and they go to high school and they want to say, look, I've really given it a shot, but French isn't working for me, I want to go to Spanish, that's not an alternative.
okay.
Some years,